morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me introduce myself. My name is Dewa Bagus Kuncoro, and I'm responsible for guitarist and vocalist in Chaotic Heaven. The purpose of today's presentation is to inform you about the screaming technique. If you have any question you'd like to ask, please leave them until the end, when I will do my best to answer them. So, in today's presentation, I'd like to cover 3 points. Firstly, I will describe what the screaming technique is. Secondly, I will explain what kind of screaming technique. And finally, the third one, I will mention some bands which use this singing technique. Before I start, does anyone know about screaming technique which is usually used by metal vocalists? If you all don't have any idea about it, so let me explain it to you. Now, let's take a look at the definition of screaming itself. Screaming is an extended vocal technique that is mostly popular in aggressive music genres such as heavy metal, punk, hardcore, and their subgenre. Also, you can find scream technique in some jazz or blues songs. Screaming is the representation of emotion from the song. According to myself, screaming is the way you express your emotion through a song with trained skill. Because if you are not well trained to scream, you can break your throat and your vocal cord. Well, I have told you about the description of screaming technique in music. Now, let's move on to the next part. I will talk about kind of screaming techniques. You think scream doesn't need technique? That's a big mistake. I will explain 5 kind of screaming techniques in this topic. The first one, we have scream technique. As you can notice the scream word in the title, so this technique means that you can produce your loud voice by breathing out. But it's not the same as the usual scream that people did. You have to give a distortion to your voice to make it a bit heavier. So let's move to the second technique. We have growl technique. This technique is almost the same with scream. Some people call it as low scream. This technique can produce the deeper voice while you exhaling. All you have to do is do it by shaping your mouth into O shape. Let's move to the third technique. We have grunt technique. This technique is worked differently with 2 lists I've been talking about, because you need to do it by breathing in the air. It's absolutely difficult if you've never done this before. The sound of this technique is almost the same with growl. So let's move on to the pig squeal technique. Have you ever heard a pig squealing? How does it sound? What if human can produce this sound? Sound interesting, right? The way to do this technique is the same with grunt, but you need to fold your tongue upside down. If you've never done it, I bet you get an instant cough. And then the last one, we have fry technique. This technique is almost the same with scream. If you want to do this technique, don't push too hard your voice. This technique sounds differently in people which use this. It depends on vocal character in every applicator. That's all I have to say about kind of screaming technique. Now, we will move on to the last topic I'm going to talking about. It is about what are bands which use this kind of techniques. So the first one, we have scream technique. I want to mention some bands which I know the vocalists use this scream technique. If you'd like to see, there are a lot of bands use this technique such as Bring Me the Horizon, Linkin Park, Avenged Sevenfold, Asking Alexandria, and many more. The second one, we have growl technique. You can also find this technique to these bands. There are Bring Me the Horizon, Asking Alexandria, Capture the Crown, Slipknot, and many more. Grunt technique. You will rarely find the bands that use this technique, but I will mention some to you. There are Lamb of God, Whitechapel, Amon Amarth, and many more. And in the fourth, we have pig squeal technique. This one is pretty difficult technique, so you will rarely find this technique too. Usually used in death metal band. So here they are. We have Whitechapel, Waking the Cadaver, Job for a Cowboy, and many more. And the last technique we have Fry. This one is common technique used in metalcore genre. So I can mention you easily who they are. We have Of Mice and Men, Bring Me the Horizon, Dance Gavin Dance, Pierce the Veil, and many more. We have looked at what bands use these techniques. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention. But before I end this presentation, let's summarize briefly what we've looked at. Screaming is one of a vocal technique in singing. You mostly find screaming vocal in extreme music genres such as metal, rock, heavy metal, and etc. It's better for you to scream when you learn the technique first. There are 5 common techniques of scream such as scream, growl, grunt, big squeal, and fry. To do scream, growl, and fry, you need to breathe out the air and give distortion to your throat. To do grunt and big squeal, you need to breathe in the air and give distortion to your throat. There are so many bands that the vocalists are able to do this technique. There are Bring Me the Horizon, Asking Alexandria, Linkin Park, Slipknot, and many more. In conclusion, screaming is a skill. Screaming is a beautiful skill more than you know. It takes talent sometimes to do it. Screaming needs technique to be done. You have to learn how to scream in a proper way or you will break your vocal cord. I suggest you not to do it if you are not willing to swim in extreme music genre. Finally, I'd like to end by thanking you all for your attention. If you have any question, please don't hesitate to ask.